Hey everyone, it's Lindsay Rhodes, and I've got a new podcast, the NFL Road Show. Fun and kind of nerdy conversation about the NFL every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I've got some amazing guests that are joining me. I'll be breaking the huddle with the top stories, previewing games. We'll get you set for the weekend fantasy with our Fantasy Friday episodes, and we'll answer some of your questions as well. So subscribe to the NFL Road Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
What is up, Hardwood Knocks listeners? I am Dan Valley, coming at you without my fantastic co-host, Adam Fromwell. As usual, though, super excited to be joined by not one, but two guests. First, we bring on Adam Spinella. You can follow him on Twitter at Spinella14, Spinella 14. He is a Dickinson College assistant men's basketball coach, as well as a contributor to the Celtics blog. Also has a fantastic YouTube channel. You should go check that out. He's breaking down stuff all the time. Just search Adam Spinella, it'll come up. He actually comes on and we're doing a bunch of rookie predictions. We recorded this a couple weeks ago. Didn't have a chance to get it out until now because we really wanted to get those team look-aheads rolling. So nothing we said I don't think will be outdated, but if we're commenting on odd breaking news or anything like that, just, look past it. It's still evergreen pod, so it's going up now. After we speak with him, we talk to another frequent guest of the pod, Lazarus Jackson. He is not only the dean of Pistons Twitter, as it says in his bio, but he's also the editor at Detroit Bad Boys. He hosts the Detroit Bad Boys podcast over there, and he also hosts the Pistons versus Everybody pod for the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Yet another crossover episode happening here. Follow him on Twitter at LazChance. That's at LazChance. Before we get started, just our usual reminder to continue rating, reviewing, and subscribing to Hardwood Knocks on iTunes. If you don't use iTunes, subscribe to us wherever else you get your podcast. Make sure you're downloading every episode. However, regardless of whether you use iTunes, head over there, search Hardwood Knocks, throw us that 5-star rating, write a review. Those are the things that help us a ton. Cannot stress that enough. Cannot plead with you enough to continue doing that. Without further delay, though, let's get to some rookie year predictions and to some Detroit Pistons deep dive talk. First and foremost, though, Adam, how are you doing?
Dan, thank you for having me on. I'm doing great. I think like everybody else right now, finding a way to survive and adapt and make the most out of these situations. We tell the guys on the team that we coach here, we got to find a way to turn this into an opportunity. So long as our friends, our family are not, health-wise or financially impacted by all this stuff too much, try to find ways to get better at things. And, glad to see a lot of people have taken that to heart and, finding ways to just get through it on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, the thing that I found tough is focusing on, from at least my end, something that in the grand scheme of things is so inessential. Like, I think I've done or survived as long as I have in the industry by leaning in to my lack of essentiality, just because at the end of the day, I do spend, probably 60 to 80 hours a week covering a game. But as the coronavirus pandemic has been going on, and then obviously the fallout from it, just the impact everywhere, it makes you feel like, for me personally, when I'm doing this, it makes me feel like even less purposeful with what I'm doing. I still enjoy it, but it's tough to focus on because, the NBA season is starting up again, and people are talking about, will they be able to finish all 72 games? What are the positive test rates going to look like? They're looking at what's happening with the NFL right now, where there's just this onrush of positive cases and postponements, and are they leaving enough time between these reschedules? And the answer is clearly no. So there's you have to focus on that because that's part of your job. And talking about basketball is also fun, but then there's all this real world, more important stuff going on. And it's also important to keep perspective. It's just something I personally have struggled to grapple with, is the focus on the basketball when there's so much more profound things happening around us, profoundly negative in a lot of instances as well.
Yeah. And, adaptability is the best ability to have right now, whether it's us who are going through and needing to find ways to fill the rest of our schedule and, adapt to what life is like in a, quarantine or socially distanced world. And for NBA teams and general managers, front offices, players, it's all about adapting to the frequent changes, whether that's on a daily or weekly basis with COVID protocols, testings, positives, the way that they have to change things on the fly, or with the unique offseason that we just are really wrapping up right now from the 2-week truncated period of draft and free agency and everything getting crammed into a small window. Adaptability really has been the name of the game this year.
We spoke about this quickly before we started this conversation officially about keeping track of who ended up where, and there are like by the season I hope I'm just a little bit more schooled in it, but there are still instances where I'm forgetting things, and like I mentioned to you, I forgot Trevor Ariza ended up on the Thunder. Though in my defense there, I feel like at one point Trevor Ariza probably forgot that he ended up on the Thunder, given how many balls were in the air at some point. So I need to make sure that I'm on point for that. I can't be shocked when I see like, Jacob Evans suiting up for the Knicks on opening night or something.
Yeah, and I feel like the walking meme of Allen from The Hangover with those math numbers just trickling down right in front of me. Like that's just how I feel trying to process who's where and all of the different player movement, especially when it comes to Oklahoma City. Man, that's just been a smorgasbord of trades.
And I know, like, for the rookies specifically who we're about to really talk about, like this has to be like I don't even know what the word would be, but they're all of a sudden like they go from the last time let's say a lot of these kids played basketball was, let's say, around March or something, and now all of a sudden they're in NBA training camp after just being drafted 2 weeks ago, and you have to ramp it up like to be ready for an actual regular season. No summer league or anything like that. So there's like a level of, I think this is an extreme way to put it because they obviously weren't going at zero, but let's say like you're all of a sudden going from like 30 miles an hour to 120. So that kind of has to be like sort of a huge reality check for them, like as they're getting prepped for their rookie season, where it was so far away, or they didn't know when it was going to happen, and then all of a sudden it's all happening at once.
And we're going to see, two different courses of action that teams take with their rookies. One is to understand that a lot of these guys need time and polish and are definitely not going to be ready after a 2-week camp just to get themselves in with no summer league experience. So they're going to keep those guys on the bench and not put them in a rotation until they feel really, really comfortable. Or the other end of the equation, we're going to see teams who say, you know what, we invested in this young man. We need them to figure it out on the fly and just throw them into the fire and see what happens. So I'm curious, just based on the individual circumstances of each team and each prospect, who gets lumped into which camp, who's going to have the leash to play through some of their mistakes that we know they're going to make early, and which teams are going to say, let's wait a little bit longer.
So interesting kind of segue there is I want to ask you about how the top 5 picks unfolded. And normally I think you would just assume that most of the top 5 picks would, be baptized by fire, where they're just going to be given these huge roles. But you just laid out all those circumstances where things can change. So just to briefly recap the top 5, Timberwolves took Edwards at 1, Warriors took Wiseman at 2, Hornets took LaMelo at 3, the Bulls took Patrick Williams at 4, which I think shocked pretty much everybody. And then the Cavs took Isaac Okoro at 5. The first question I wanted to ask you is, how should if you were doing this draft for each team, how would the first 5 picks have gone? I'm interested to see if there would be any changes there for you.
So I hesitate to answer this question in like the steadfast terms of how I would do it based on my big board, because I think there's value in going along with the consensus somewhat. And this is more so in terms of, if I'm Charlotte and I have the 3rd pick, I understand that LaMelo Ball is probably going to be the best guy available right there. Mm-hmm. Just in terms of what other teams are looking for, how he's valued across the league. I would be more inclined to either take him 3rd and then try to flip that for something of equal value, or trade down and out of that spot if I didn't want LaMelo there. So it's hard to, blame Charlotte for taking a guy that I don't have even in my top 14, when I understand the, value that he has around the league, and the perception is really what drives him into that spot. So if I were making this draft, I'd probably go Edwards first in Minnesota. I had him number 1, and Wiseman to Golden State number 2. Those two went hand in hand. Charlotte, for value, I probably would do the same thing if I were in their shoes and take LaMelo, but I love Kyra Lewis Jr. He ended up going to New Orleans at 13. Big fan of his, and think that he'd be that kind of next best offensive player, especially in the backcourt, that would be available. 4 for Chicago. I'm a huge Devin Vassell guy. Like I'm not even shy about saying that's my man crush in this year's draft. Unbelievably smart help defender, and I keep saying the best help defender I've ever scouted at the college level. You add that with his raw tools, a 6'10" wingspan, some upside to create off the bounce, 40% shooter from 3 over the last 2 years at Florida State. Everything about his game screams modern NBA. And then 5th for Cleveland, I go back and forth. I really like Denny Avdia. He ended up going ninth to Washington and went on a little bit of a slide, which not a lot of folks predicted. But he's that jack of all trades, master of none. And for Cleveland right now, I think that would have been a pretty wise pick, not just for fit, but it gives you the versatility to add a really good player that's not going to hurt you in any way, but gives you the freedom, the flexibility to figure out what they're going to do with Love, Drummond, and then their two young guys in the backcourt moving forward.
I think in the 24 to 36 hours leading up to the draft, it felt like it became fairly clear that Edwards was going to be the pick. And so you also can't say he came out of nowhere because he was in the discussion for the entire year. But it felt like for so long, the focus had kind of been on like, will they trade out of it so that someone could take LaMelo Ball or Wiseman? And that Edwards was kind of just assumed like, oh, maybe he'll go 2 or maybe he'll go 3. But then he ends up being the number 1 pick. And so do you think this was probably more so a matter of Minnesota drafting for fit when they should have gone for BPA, or do you think that of those 3, just because there are only 3 names in the discussion, that he probably has the best chance of like being the BPA in that one spot when you're looking at it relative to LaMelo Ball and James Wiseman?
Yeah, I thought he was best player available, best prospect available, and to be honest, he cemented that for me and got into the number 1 spot on my board a little over a year ago. It was around Thanksgiving time at the Maui Invitational. He scored over 30 points in the second half against Michigan State and took Georgia from down more than 25 to come back and make it a 1-possession game late in the end. And I knew at that point, this is a class that is incredibly weak on alpha scorers, especially in the backcourt. Mm-hmm. And just his ability to flash that potential. There are going to be inconsistencies and frustrations with him, but you got to remember, this guy's a year younger for his class than everybody else. He should have just finished up his senior year in high school. So I have a lot more understanding and patience with some of the mental mistakes, the shot selection, the lack of intensity on defense, and believe that those are much more correctable than some of the people who had him lower than first overall on their board would. Because if those concerns are fixed or at least brought up to league average, then there's no question he's number 1.
The next question I had for you it pertains to those 3. So who has the bigger impact just as a rookie when you're looking at Edwards, Wiseman, and LaMelo?
They all have the potential to have it. I think Edwards and LaMelo are definitely going to be 2 of those guys that play through mistakes, receive minutes early on in their career, and are expected to be on the floor at the end of games for their team. So typically those 2 are the ones that you look at as saying, we know they're going to have an impact as a rookie. Like Wiseman's an interesting one just with the circumstance in Golden State. You'd think that they would default to some of the veteran guys a little earlier on or in late game situations if they have them. But I don't know. I probably would say LaMelo has the bigger impact on his team, just because with the recent moves that have been made by Charlotte and how they can surround him with shooting at pretty much every other backcourt position, he should have the ball in his hands a decent amount. So I think that LaMelo is probably the one of those 3 that gets the longest leash, the most opportunity to prove what he can do right away. But impact doesn't necessarily mean, positive impact, right? So I think that LaMelo is going to have as many bad nights as he does good ones, but he's definitely going to have the opportunity to play through it.
So you do think that he'll have, because I'm looking at this and normally I feel like it's easier to discern what type of roles certainly the top 3 picks will have, but you look at Minnesota and Golden State specifically, and like those are 2 teams. We know Golden State fancies itself more than just a playoff hopeful. They probably want to contend. And then Minnesota, like you don't make that D'Angelo Russell trade unless you're trying to make the playoffs this season. And so it feels like those 2 could actually end up having like a shorter road to work with. And then in Charlotte, I don't say this just because they signed Gordon Hayward, but I'm just curious because you do make that investment. You have Devontae Graham already, and I am interested to see whether they actually give him like really the leeway to plumb the depths of his game for better and worse.
We can talk in many different ways about the Gordon Hayward signing, how much money he got, whether it's the right fit and the move for them. Short term, just thinking about how it helps LaMelo, it's a really, really good fit for someone who kind of mentors in a little bit of that facilitating wing type of way and gives him another late clock option that can create his own shot reliably in ways that, Graham just chucks up threes and Rozier, you never know what you're going to get. So I understand why Hayward's presence really does help LaMelo in the short term. But yeah, it's, I'll be the first one to admit I've not been that high on LaMelo. I don't see him becoming an efficient guy in the role that he's in. He may put up gaudy numbers, but it's more so due to volume and kind of empty calories as opposed to really quarterbacking a winning team.
2020 has already reshaped how we work, and it's almost over. Businesses across the globe are challenged to be their most efficient, which means every hire is critical. Well, Indeed is here to help. Unlike other sites, Indeed gives you full control and payment flexibility over your hiring. You only pay for what you need, you can pause your account at any time, and there are no long-term contracts. And now, Indeed's new way of matching you with candidates instantly delivers a short list of quality candidates whose resumes on Indeed match your job criteria that you can contact the moment you sponsor a job, making Indeed the only job site that can move as fast as you do. Right now, Indeed is offering our listeners a free $75 credit to boost your job post, which means more quality candidates will see it, and fast. Try Indeed out with a free $75 credit at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. This is their best offer available anywhere. Go right now to Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Offer is valid through December 31st. Terms and conditions apply.
The next up I have for you is, who did you have as the biggest reach in the draft?
It's funny. So I looked at, in kind of the playback of the draft here, the top 24 picks all seem to be guys that I looked at, and I said, yeah, this is about the range where these guys should go, or where consensus has them pegged right now. And once we got out of that, it started to seem like, preference set in for fit, or teams that fancy themselves and really got their eyes set on one target. And the biggest reach for me came with Boston at 26, taking Peyton Pritchard. Part of that, as we see now with the news on Kemba Walker and his knee being rested, I think they knew they needed a point guard and somebody that was going to be a long-term facilitator, whether it's someone that they hand the reins to once Kemba's career dwindles down, or if it's just somebody that's able to come in and play 12 to 15 minutes a night right now on a playoff team. And either way you look at it, I thought there were better guards on the board when Boston was on the clock at 26 for those spots. If you're looking for the long-term play, I think Tyrell Terry would have been awesome there. He's a floor spacer that would give Tatum and Brown so much room to operate. And yes, he still needs a little bit more work. He's not quite ready to log minutes, but if they wanted to take the long-term patient approach, he had the highest upside of all the guards available. If you're looking for instant impact, I had both Malachi Flynn and Trey Jones ahead of them. Flynn ended up going a little bit later to Toronto. I just think he's more well-rounded, much better, stronger individual defender, and is a couple years younger than Pritchard. As well, Jones, for me, I love his on-ball defense. That's an area that, as a coach, I fall in love with guys who are just disruptors. Mm-hmm. And I thought he would have been a really, really capable backup point guard from day one. So for me, it's a reach, not because he's not necessarily a end of the first round talent, but because I just thought there were convincingly three other guys on the board that would have been better than him.
I'm a little bit surprised you didn't go with Patrick Williams at 4, because if I'm not mistaken, you had him outside the top 25 on your big board, right?
I did, but I also understand why he goes there. There's so much tantalizing upside with what he could become. My pessimism on him was that if he doesn't become that, there's very little way that he's going to be an impactful NBA player. I just, the thing I keep coming back to with him is be good at what you do frequently. And he's not a very good catch and shoot threat. He's, best hitting jumpers in the mid range off the pull up, and he's a decent passer. But if you're not a transcendent scorer and somebody who gets to the rim at a high rate or can create your own shot reliably, you don't get asked to do that frequently. So I get the upside pick with Patrick Williams at 4. Wouldn't have been my selection, but I can rationalize it in a way that I can't with Pritchard based on, what other guards were on the board.
I wasn't, as someone who was like on the Patrick Williams bandwagon. I'm not happy with the fit for him, because it does seem like Chicago is going to end up playing him a lot at the 3, which I don't know that he has like the burst to do, like defensively, and like I think you could even say offensively as well, but definitely defensively, where I think you might have, like, I don't know. I would have rather seen him gone somewhere where I know he's going to get like have a monopoly of his minutes come at the 4. But again, as we had talked about on the side, like I understand the upside play for there. I just don't know if the Bulls were the team to make it unless they plan on shaking up their front court personnel at the moment.
And now would be an opportunity, Dan, if I could, just to I get asked all the time, why are you rooting against this guy? Why are you saying all these things about he's not worth it at number 4? Like the whole draft analysis part of this is trying to analyze which bets individually we would and would not make. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean that I'm rooting against this kid. I'd love to see Patrick Williams go out there and prove everybody wrong and be the best player overall in this class. That would be awesome. But you're asking individuals what bets they feel comfortable making and which ones they don't. And for me, that's just one, at least that early in the draft, which with so much room between where he is right now as a ball of clay and how you would theoretically use him, I wasn't comfortable making that pick anywhere near the top of the draft.
It's funny how people view it that way, where it's like criticism they equate to like an actual. It's not even like that can be a belief, but you're not actually pulling to be right in those situations necessarily. Like you're giving an opinion, people conflate it with, oh, you hate them. So Spins doesn't hate anyone, at least not who's entered the NBA draft, at least not this NBA draft. Who was the biggest steal of the draft? And I put outside the top 10 on this for you just because, I don't know, just to make it a little bit more interesting, like kind of late lottery or just totally outside the lottery.
RJ Hampton.
And you went totally outside the lottery.
I did. 24th to Denver, a huge RJ Hampton guy. And some of this comes down to what I mentioned earlier with Anthony Edwards. He's a year younger. He reclassed to leave high school earlier and go to New Zealand and play with the New Zealand Breakers. So his story is as much of a reason why I'm high on him figuring it out as the actual skills that he's shown. He was a point guard all through high school, through AAU, when he was on the USA basketball select squads as a youngster. He played with the ball in his hands 95% of the time he was on the floor. He signed with a team in Australia, or technically New Zealand, that was in playoff contention and had really good veteran guard play. A couple guys that were in their 20s and 30s, and they were competing for a playoff opportunity. So Hampton did not have the leash to play through mistakes on ball or learn all of the requirements needed for a professional level point guard on the fly, and moved him almost like to a 2 or a 3 on the wing. And imagine being somebody who has the ball in your hands 95% of the time and then moves into a almost completely inverse role where you're off ball so much. And of course, Hampton's numbers aren't going to pop. Of course, what he's able to show this year isn't that impressive. But I went back and watched the Breakers did a scrimmage against the Oklahoma City Thunder last October when Hampton should have been sitting in biology class or statistics. He's out there guarding Chris Paul and playing against him. And he showed very well. He made some really nice passes out of the pick and roll. He has a second gear athletically that only guys like Russell Westbrook and Zach LaVine really have in this league. There's a lot to like with him upside-wise. He's young. He's going to take a little bit of time, but I really believe that if you put him in spread pick and rolls, he's going to make a lot of positive plays.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like for offensively, like 2 of the biggest knocks on him is one, there's the shooting, and then the inconsistent pressure he puts on the rim. And being in Denver, again, we don't know how much time he's going to get. Probably not much as a rookie, but long-term, looking at how they play, like he might be putting pressure on the rim organically if he's working off the ball, just with the way that they get guys moving towards the rim and Jokic is able to find them. So 1, do you agree with that? But then 2, like how concerned are you about like the numbers on his jumper being not so pretty?
So Denver's a great fit for him, and he's exactly the type of guy that Denver should take. Like we've seen them just go big game hunting over the last few years. They took Michael Porter Jr., and it seems to be working out. They took Bol, and that one seems to be working out fairly well for where he was drafted. They're hitting on all of their high upside swings. And you mentioned the system with Jokic stretching defenses out is going to give him more opportunities to slash and cut to the rim. I think Monte Morris is going to be playing himself into a bigger contract next summer, and Denver might be wise to let him walk. I can see Hampton filling in admirably in that kind of backup handler, creating point guard type of role. The shooting worries for me. He's been working with Mike Miller, the elite shooter that stood in the corner and carried the Miami Heat's 3-point shooting percentage for years, and that's helped Hampton quite a bit. I don't know. I'm not in the room there or in the gym. It's hard for me to speculate as to how much of a tangible gain that's going to be. But it seems like the kid wants to work, and if you surround hardworking people with the right mentors, the right shooting coaches, those who are going to be able to improve them, you're willing to take those gambles that those guys are going to continue to figure it out. So does it worry me a little bit? But I also can't think of many people who I'd bet on figuring it out over RJ.
I was going to ask you if you considered another player for this spot, but you actually mentioned this player in the following question that I had asked you. So which team overall had the best draft to you? And this was, posed to you while looking at the macro. Like it could have been, trades, acquiring established NBA players, but also obviously the picks that they were able to use and the prospects they took with them.
Yeah, there's hybrids of all of those, whether it's trade or draft or trade and draft. Like Portland had an awesome night getting Robert Covington that whole week. Like that was awesome for them because he's the perfect fit. But to me, the two winners of the draft are San Antonio and Philadelphia. San Antonio got the prospect who was number 3 on my board in Devin Vassell. They got him at 11, and a top 20 guy in Trey Jones at 41. Two really, really feisty defenders on ball and off ball, really high IQ competitors, guys who went at it with each other twice in the ACC this year, and two guys that are pretty good shooters. Vassell, as we mentioned, above 40% from 3, 2 years in college. The knock on Trey Jones, and this is the one game that will stick in my head forever and ever, he was guarded by Taco Fall in the NCAA tournament when Duke played UCF. And UCF almost pulled off the upset because Jones couldn't shoot. He went back, he worked in the gym, he got up to 36% from 3 this year and 40% on catch and shoots. You put him with Chip England, the famed shooting coach in San Antonio, he's only going to get better. Like that is such a dream scenario for him. That these are just two unbelievable values that not just fit their culture, but might have been best player available when they were on the clock each time.
I shouldn't say knowing that I only, dig into the draft so late, it surprised me personally that Vassell didn't go a little bit earlier because you were the one that, he was one of the prospects that I watched earlier because you turned me on to him in one of our side conversations. And it, you can mention 3-and-D with him, but when you watch him, it feels like he might have the ball skills necessary to do a lot more on the offensive end. And I just would have thought when you look at the archetype, 3-and-D, but he has the potential to do more on offense with the ball. I thought for sure that he was going to go inside the top 10. And so it ended up to me being a great pick for San Antonio, which quietly has gone from never rostering wings to now having a ton of them. So good for them, I guess. But I really didn't think he was going to make it to number 11.
And it's the perfect scenario for him because if there's one team, one player development staff that you trust to, milk the most out of him as a creator off the bounce and be more than just a 3-and-D wing, like you mentioned, it's got to be the Spurs, right?
Right. The thing that surprised me most about him, by the way, is I thought once he fell to 10 that he was just a shoo-in to go to Phoenix. I thought that just made so much sense. I know they have Bridges there, and then they obviously went on. They have Cam Johnson. They went on to sign Jay Crowder, and then you also had Dario Saric. But just sort of someone who could plug and play and maybe make an impact on the team next season. I was not expecting the Jalen Smith pick there. That was the one that floored me. I just thought that Devin Vassell was such a perfect fit in Phoenix. I think he's a good fit in San Antonio, but that was the spot where I looked at it personally was I can't believe he fell past Phoenix.
Yeah, it was. I think he and Bridges would have been a dynamic wing backcourt defensive duo there. But I got to mention Philadelphia too, and I just wrote a really long article and did the longest film breakdown of my career. I did 42-minute video on the Doc Rivers offense for using shooters off screens. Just looking at how he's used J.J. Redick or Landry Shamet, Ray Allen during his time in Boston, and what that's going to do with Seth Curry in Philadelphia. I think that they won draft night by getting Tyrese Maxey a really good value at 21 where they got him. Isaiah Joe, a really good pickup in the second round, and a guy who I had a lottery grade to, just because I think he's going to be one of the best catch and shoot prospects in this draft class, if not the best shooter available. And you combine, Doc Rivers' arrival and the added spacing that you get with Seth Curry coming into the fold next to Embiid and Simmons. It just completely transformed their offense. They got rid of Al Horford too, which is a huge win. So Philly had an awesome string of days there around the draft.
Seth Curry should be molten there. What's the one pick to you that's not getting just enough attention, and it could be for better or for worse?
I mentioned this at the very top. I had Kyra Lewis Jr. as a top 5 grade on my draft, and he ended up going to New Orleans in a situation where they got rid of Drew Holiday, and Lonzo Ball is there, but I don't know if my trust in him as a primary facilitator is dwindling. Lewis is a very good catch and shoot prospect. Everyone talks about speed with him because it's glaring. It's the first thing that jumps out at you, how unbelievably fast he is, especially in the full court. But there's a guy who shot 40% on catch and shoots last year, and you're putting him at the guard spot next to Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram, two really good kind of isolation one-on-one guys on the wings. That in itself is a really good fit. You've cleared a path to minutes for him by getting rid of Drew Holiday and not having to take back a ton of, guard depth. I know Eric Bledsoe is still going to be there and probably end up starting, but it's a lot easier to justify playing Lewis some minutes early on in his career over a guy like Bledsoe than it is over Holiday. So I'm really fascinated to see the open floor speed that he brings next to Zion, the half court shooting, and he's a really underrated pick and roll playmaker. So as he continues to develop his game, and Stan Van Gundy is a wizard at coaching point guards in the pick and roll, I think it's just an unbelievable fit of player and organization.
I think when you look at the type of role he had played at Alabama, you wouldn't, at least I wouldn't have expected this, but over 52% of his threes came off assists. And so does that make a cleaner pathway to him being a fit alongside another ball dominant guard type, whether that's Lonzo or Eric Bledsoe, because he's going to have to play in tandem with at least one of them.
And I'm a big believer in, the people who know you but don't have a stake in you. When they advocate on your behalf, it says a lot about you. And Avery Johnson recruited him to go to Alabama, was his coach for his first year, and then got fired. And he went on national television and was a CBS draft analyst this year and was saying that Kyra Lewis should have been a top 7 or 8 draft pick. And to me, he doesn't have a dog in the fight anymore. It doesn't do Avery any good to see Kyra get ranked that high anymore. And to see him go out there and really push for him really validated a lot of what I was seeing in Kyra, just as a really, really dynamic playmaker, not just in the full court, but in the half court.
The wait is finally over. Football is back. You might not be at a game this year, but you can still be in on the action at BetOnline. BetOnline is going the extra mile to make sure you can get in on every possible chance to win this season. From game spreads and totals to team, player, and coaching props, BetOnline gives you more options to wager on than anywhere else. You can get in on their season opening bonuses today and start off wagering on wins, division odds, and championship futures all day, every day. Head to BetOnline today and take advantage of all the great sign-up bonuses. Don't forget to use promo code BLUEWIRE, all one word, at betonline.ag. That's Blue Wire, all one word. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts.
Prodding you towards some predictions for their rookie season, who leads this rookie class in points per game next year?
I'm going to go with Edwards. I just think he's a naturally gifted scorer, and the 5-out spacing in Minnesota gives him very little excuse to get to the rim a ton. So I'm pretty high on him, though. Obi Toppin did sneak into the frame of mind.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
Yeah, just with his polish and being ready. A lot of the top picks this year are a little bit younger. Obi was really the oldest one around there, at least of those who are scorers first. So I thought about it, but Edwards seems like the right guy.
The wild card for him, too, would be how much will Tibbs play him if Julius Randle is still there? Opportunity could end up being an issue. Did you think about LaMelo Ball at all?
And I think Ball probably leads in assists.
There you go. Spoiler, that's the next category.
But I had a really difficult time in thinking that he's going to score it well enough. With Edwards, he has the potential to be an elite finisher right now, as long as he wants to get to the rim. And as we mentioned, Minnesota's 5-out spacing with Karl Anthony Towns living and just setting up camp at the top of the key. Like, that's going to give Edwards all the lanes he needs to get to the basket. So I feel more comfortable with him than I do with LaMelo, just as a very, average or below average finisher right now.
Okay, so you have Edwards for points per game, assists per game. You have LaMelo, which I feel like is kind of the obvious one, but you also have someone else if we're looking at their career. I saw you put in the notes here.
I did, yeah. Kyra, I think we mentioned the short-term blockade of minutes there with Bledsoe and Lonzo and, even Josh Hart getting minutes as a backup combo. Like, Lewis may not get the most opportunity right out of the gates, but if you're asking me who retires from this draft class with the most assists per game or, most assists total, I'm probably going to go with Kyra.
Man, you're all in on Kyra.
I am. There are only 4 guys that I look at in this draft class that I said I would want them in the lottery or the top 10 of any other draft. And it's Edwards, Wiseman, Kyra, and Vassell.
Rebounds per game leader for rookies next season.
I'm going with Toppin here, and this is a really strange kind of dark horse pick for me. Like, I thought of Wiseman, but I'm not sure how much he's going to play. I thought of Okongwu, but I'm not sure how much he's going to play in the logjam that is the Atlanta Hawks front court right now. Toppin, I think, has the clearest path to minutes. And beyond that, I'm not really comfortable with any other big man really carving themselves out a role right away. So it's more so, I guess, just opportunity that leads to it. Like, even LaMelo could sneak in and lead this category. Just guys who get minutes are really the only ones you can count on to lead in these categories. And, Toppin, being a little bit older, might be a half step ahead of some of these guys to earn minutes right out of the gate. So I'm going to default to him here.
What did you think of the Toppin pick for the Knicks, particularly given with some of the players that were left on the board at that number, or were they the 8 spot?
Shout out to my guy, Leon Rose, Dickinson College graduate. I think it was a solid pick here because even though I'm not incredibly high on Toppin's ceiling, he stabilizes their front court a little bit in an area that's been just a smorgasbord of veterans over the last few years. Like, they needed to get a little bit younger at the 4 and provide some shooting. At his floor, so to speak, he's an impactful offensive player that can space the floor, finish on the inside, put home some monster dunks and lobs. Like, you can play him in a lot of different ways offensively, which he's not going to be your number one option. But for the Knicks, I don't think that they needed to reach on somebody at number 8 to try to be a number one option. There just wasn't that guy in this draft class when they were on the clock. So I'm fine with it. I think it was a good pick.
I get it because they desperately need competent shooting around their bigs with they end up signing Noel, but you have Mitchell Robinson and RJ Barrett is not defenses aren't going to respect his jumper at the moment, and then you do have questionable shooters elsewhere. So having someone who comes in with that floor spacing polish is big. I feel like I still would have rather of them gone with a bigger swing like Tyrese Haliburton there, or Devin Vassell would have obviously been okay by me as well.
Yeah, if we're using draft boards and everything like that, I had Jalen Smith ranked ahead of Obi Toppin, and I had Devin Vassell and Kyra Lewis as top 4 guys in this draft, and they were both on the board. If you're asking me who I would have taken, yeah, there are other guys on my list, but I don't think Toppin was a bad pick by any means, just because, like you're mentioning, the need for shooting and a little bit of functionality right away was really important.
Who's your steals per game leader prediction for the rookies?
Got to be Vassell for me, he does face a little bit of a blockade to minutes there, where I did think about Haliburton a little bit in Sacramento, but there aren't a ton of guys that I just am so confident in defensively making the transition, and that's one area where with Vassell I'm pretty confident there.
Blocks per game.
I'm copping out on this one and giving it a tie with Wiseman and Okongwu of whoever gets more minutes is going to lead in blocks per game. I know that sounds like a cop-out answer here, but quite frankly, it's splitting hairs with two circumstances where maybe their path to minutes is blocked, maybe it's not.
And I guess if you had to pick between which two, like of the two, who gets more minutes, I think, or at least me personally, my pick might be Okongwu. Just it feels like Golden State has a greater need, but you do have Kevon Looney. There's Chris there if they ever want to go to Draymond at the 5. And then in Atlanta, you don't necessarily know how healthy Capella is. And then there's a chance that they end up trading John Collins, or we don't know. It doesn't seem that they love the idea of playing him at the 5 anyway, given that you trade for Capella and then you draft Okongwu. So I feel like it'd be Okongwu that ends up playing more minutes per game, but I don't feel confident in that at all.
Yeah,
because Atlanta at least has you look at them and be like, oh, okay, Clint Capella is clearly the starting center there, where the Warriors don't have that to the extent that James Wiseman could just be penciled in for 25 minutes a game, technically.
Definitely. So I'm curious to see how this all shakes out. We could get to a point where the Warriors are, maybe more of a 6, 7, 8 seed in the Western Conference without Clay. And if that's the case, maybe they open up Wiseman a little bit more. If there's trade and movement in Atlanta, definitely Okongwu was drafted with the idea that he's going to be a focal point at some point. That was a real toss-up for me.
Your pick here was interesting. 3-pointers made.
3-pointers made. I'm going Cole Anthony.
So you just think he's going to have the green light?
I do a little bit. That's a team that's starving for shooting. I think they need a backup point guard. DJ Augustine is gone, and Anthony has to come in here and play a lot of those minutes as a replacement. So he is a scorer at heart. That's what he does. And I love Steve Clifford. He's one of my man crushes when it comes to NBA head coaches. He puts every single player on the court in a position to succeed. And Anthony has the ability to play next to Markelle Fultz, to play behind him, to run the second team offense and be that bench scorer, or come in and just kind of space the floor around some of their other guys. So I think he's going to get some early run in there, and he's going to surprise a lot of people with how ready he is to at least knock down some shots from distance.
And the final, official category, advanced metrics darling. And you obviously could open this to whatever advanced metrics you like. If you like VORP, if you want, total points added, there's PIPM, RPM. Who's going to be the advanced metrics darling during their rookie season?
So the one common link that I've found in a lot of these analytical models is they really value possession. Guys who don't turn the ball over in a lot of things that they do. You obviously have to be efficient finishing, whether it's scoring or having assists, be a solid and competent defensive player. But if you don't turn the ball over or are responsible for ending possessions in the negative, you have a pretty good chance at being an advanced metrics darling. So the trendy pick in that category is always going to be Tyrese Haliburton, because he had a really impressive assist to turnover ratio in college. But I don't think he's an efficient enough scorer to really carry that mantle. If I had to pick one guy, it's going to be Saddiq Bey with the Detroit Pistons now. A Villanova man always has the key to my heart, because they play such fundamentally well-sound basketball. They make good decisions when they get in the lane. They aren't sped up and forced to play at any pace other than their own. Bey is a prolific catch-and-shoot guy. He was over 45% from 3. Last year, he was a point guard in high school. He's got a 6'10" wingspan, so he sees over the top of defenses. And he's a good, sturdy defender. I don't think that his, that's a part that should go overlooked in any of these analytical models right now, is when your team is better by you being on the floor because of what you give defensively, and you knock down shots without turning it over at the other end, it's hard to overlook that. I had Bey as I think number 10 or number 11 on my overall big board this year, just because in a class without a ton of star power, he's a really, really, really sturdy option. And, Detroit, I'm still scratching my head with what they're doing there. But if I'm looking at one guy who at least is going to come in and, the numbers will pop per minute, I think Saddiq Bey is that guy.
It's tough for me to imagine any advanced metrics loving anyone on Detroit at the moment, but that reasoning all makes sense. I like the Haliburton pick. There feels like there's an understated path to him playing like a huge role in Sacramento. They obviously already let Bogdanovich go. Who knows what happens with Buddy Hield? Like, they don't really have, if you want to try him out as a more of a backup point guard, like Corey Joseph isn't the guy, but they also just don't have, like, they're 1 and 2. It's De'Aaron Fox and Buddy Hield, and then everything behind those two guys in the backcourt is essentially open. Corey Joseph obviously factors into that, but you're not gonna. I wouldn't say at this moment that it's a guarantee that Corey Joseph has a much better impact on the Kings than Tyrese Haliburton. So it feels like I liked the pick. I didn't think he was going to get to number 12, but they're also, post Bogdanovich, it feels like there's a chance for him to actually have like a real opportunity immediately in Sacramento. And part of that might be toward the logic in letting Bogdanovich go, where, I think the consensus would be, well, you should have re-signed him and figured out a way to move him later. But it does at least show that the Kings are thinking about a longer, larger game, in which case playing Haliburton a bunch makes that much more sense.
Definitely. I think the blessing for Haliburton was finding his way to Sacramento, because Hield and Fox are the right kind of, Batman and Robin for him to come in and be the third cog in that wheel too. Luke Walton, he's tailored his offense a little bit more to De'Aaron Fox and pick and rolls and playing through him, but it's a motion-based approach where he has Buddy Hield zipping around screens. He wants to move the ball side to side, get it inside to the post just to create and facilitate out of the low post, not even to score down there. And a motion-based offense, I think, goes really, really well with Haliburton's skill set as an extremely high IQ player, somebody that's not a great creator for his own shot. And I think he's going to thrive in Sacramento.
This question I didn't have on the list, but it does feel like in most draft classes, there's at least one rookie that ends up being a top 100 like current player in the entire league. Obviously, you have John Morant and Zion last year. There was Luka Doncic, Jaren Jackson Jr. in 2018. Trae Young might have been in there as well. You go back to 2017, Jason Tatum was certainly there. 2016, Ben Simmons didn't actually play, so I'm trying to remember. Jaylen Brown wasn't at that level, so maybe that's like the last example. I'm trying to think of who else was in that draft class. Is there anyone in this draft class that you could see establishing themselves with that type of immediate value, where, again, we're not talking relative to rookies, but the rest of the league?
No. Yeah, no, there's nobody that comes to mind. And, when I went through my final big board and kind of explanations or rankings, I broke it down by saying Edwards, Wiseman, Lewis, and Vassell, the top 4 guys on my board, were all in what would ordinarily be tier 2 in any other year. So they don't really scratch the surface of having that clear superstar potential. And in order for you to make that leap from college to the pros, or Europe to the pros, whenever you get to the NBA, you have to have that superstar potential. And I just don't see it right now. Like, Edwards is the closest thing we have, but he's not going to have that opportunity. He's going to be playing third fiddle to Russell and to Towns from day one.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, but your opinion matters more than mine on that subject, so I'm actually glad we're in lockstep. Which player from this draft do you think will have the best career when all is said and done?
I think it is Edwards. I keep going back to the fact that he's young for the position that he's in right now. The natural skill and talent that he has, it's so hard to bet against. And you look back at the Andrew Wiggins draft, and I know Wolves fans are going to be pissed for the comparison, but like, Wiggins is averaging 23 and 6 and 4 for his career. Like, yeah, there's a little bit of empty stats and all that stuff to it, but Wiggins is not a bad player by any means. And that's where it comes down to with Edwards. In a weaker draft class, like, I'd rather hang my head on somebody who I know has a transcendent ceiling. And even if they don't hit their ceiling, it's still going to be, 20-ish points a game and some flashes of brilliance elsewhere. The one comparison that I keep going back to with Edwards, like, I hate when people say Victor Oladipo or Dwayne Wade or these other Tom Crean coached guys. Like, those are kind of lazy comparisons to me. I see a bigger, more physical Gilbert Arenas.
Ooh.
Where, yeah, he's going to shoot you out of some games and not be the most efficient guy. He's going to chuck from 3 when you want him to get to the rim a little bit more. But, man, can he go out there and get you 30 in a playoff game? No doubt about it.
Do you think there's like the ones that sprang to mind here? I think a lot of people might pick LaMelo Ball here, and you obviously differ from them, but I do think you've at least recognized the upside for him. Does a Tyrese Haliburton work himself into this conversation at all?
I think somebody's going to leapfrog Haliburton, where he's almost the opposite of a LaMelo Ball or a boomer bust type of guy. Like Haliburton, he's not going to be a bad pro, but I think there's very low probability that he ends up being an all-star guy.
Okay.
So he's the safer road traveled out of all these guys, and I think for him to be the best player in this draft class, we would need to see a ton of collapses from guys like Edwards, LaMelo, Wiseman, Denny Avia, Patrick Williams not working out. Like there are a lot of guys that were picked ahead of him that just have a lot higher upside.
This is a loaded question given how bad rookies tend to be on defense, but who would be your pick for defensive rookie of the year?
So, yeah, very few rookies end up making like a positive impact on defense or on winning in general. So it is kind of a fool's errand of a question, if you will. But if you're going to roll with somebody, it's got to be, the most well-polished and at least ready for the rigors of the NBA game. So I think Vassell, as you know, my man crush there, he's hard for me to bet against just because he's such an impactful on-ball and off-ball defender. It's the help defense that is going to earn him a little bit longer of a leash to play minutes right away. And then Okongwu is an incredibly solid and versatile defensive stopper at the 5. He can anchor a zone. He can play drop coverage. He can switch. He can hard hedge and move his feet really well on the perimeter. He's bothered bigs away from the basket. The flashes of being able to exist in every single type of way and be a communicative anchor down low, Okongwu would be kind of 1B in that discussion, if you will.
Vassell is interesting just because I feel like the Spurs, maybe it'll change this year, but they just tend to not play their rookies too many minutes. Like Keldon Johnson, 17.7 minutes last year, but only 17 games. They didn't play Derek White too much when he was a rookie. They didn't play Lonnie Walker too much when he was a rookie. And so I'll be interested to see how much he actually plays in San Antonio this season.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair point there, and maybe something I overlooked in thinking of my answers a little bit. I also wouldn't be surprised if the Spurs find themselves out of playoff contention and just try to move DeRozan, move Aldridge, and embrace youth movement for the second half of the season where, Vassell ends up getting those minutes for the final 6 weeks of the season.
The final question right now, and you're free to change this I guess we only have a couple weeks until the season, so no, you have to lock it in now. Who would be your Rookie of the Year pick?
Rookie of the Year pick for me is, I keep defaulting back to opportunity. Guys who I know are going to get minutes on the floor, guys who are going to have the leash to play through mistakes. And as much as we've talked about the defensive struggles that rookies have, you got to be able to score it, or at least, put up some offensive numbers that would merit the position. So I'm going to go with Anthony Edwards in Minnesota. I feel really confident that he's going to start from day one. I feel confident that he's going to be the third option in their offense, and being surrounded by shooters, a 5-out system, and a coach in Ryan Saunders that has proven willing to throw guys into the fire at a younger age. I just feel the most confident with the circumstances, his surrounding, and the fact that he's still the number 1 overall pick, and in my opinion, most talented guy in this draft class. Like I think betting on anyone else would be trying to talk yourself out of Edwards as much as anyone else proving you what their circumstances are that are better.
I think you could probably talk yourself into any of the top 3 picks because there's a chance that all of them are starting. I would think that LaMelo and Edwards will both be starting, and then obviously the Wiseman thing's up in the air, and even if he starts, there's the question of how many minutes he plays. When I do my official predictions, there's a chance that I try and get too cute/ugly and maybe go with the Tyrese Haliburton pick. He's the guy that I've fallen in love with. Him and Patrick Williams were the two that kind of I zoned in on leading up to the draft. His opportunity is obviously way more shaky in Sacramento, and like you said, you don't see him having the boom factor of a lot of the other guys, even if he ends up being fairly impactful as a rookie, which he might be. Yep, you alluded to it when you picked him for your advanced metrics darling selection.
Yeah, Haliburton is that like a little bit of a Josh Hart or a Kyle Anderson-ish. Like nothing wows you when you watch them play, and then you pick up the box score and you see that they were like 4 of 7 from the field with 4 assists, 5 rebounds, 1 turnover, a couple steals, a block. Like just solid produces. Don't notice him a ton out there. Like Haliburton, he'll get minutes early on. He's one of the more ready to go guys. But like you said, these are awards that are based on statistics and volume and opportunity on the floor to have these things pop. So hard to bet against the top pick in this draft for that.
My actual last question. So when do you begin cannonballing into the 2021 draft, or have you already started?
This is a unique time for a college basketball coach at the Division III level, since we're not having practices or games right now. This is the first time since I was in college that I get to sit down on my couch and watch college basketball games on TV. So in the last week, I think I've watched 12 or 13 full games here. Got my first pre-draft nuggets coming out on the class later tonight as we're recording this here. So probably be live by the time everybody's listening here. And I do have my big board and my top 50 preseason already set. So we've already dove in here, Dan.
Well, I look forward to pestering you again in the near future about that. Also, just about other hoops, actual NBA basketball that's going on. So rest assured, I will be continuing to bother you throughout the year. If you guys are not following Spins on Twitter, again, remedy that immediately at Spinella14. He is the Dickinson College assistant men's basketball coach, a contributor to Celtics blog. Visit his YouTube channel. Search Adam Spinella on YouTube. Go subscribe there. He's doing a lot of film breakdowns there. He just mentioned the Doc Rivers one. He did, I feasted, binged on the draft breakdowns he did for prospects. He had separate videos for strengths and weaknesses. Those were fantastic and really helped someone like me who goes through a crash course in studying leading into the draft. So follow him on Twitter. You're going to be getting a ton of good content. And once more, Broken Record Style. Adam, thank you so much for coming on. I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Dan, thank you so much, and always appreciate the opportunity just to chat some hoops, chat NBA draft stuff, and before we know it here, we're going to have basketball on Christmas.
Yes, and let's hope that it goes off with and continues to carry on without a hitch.
Absolutely.